I told you to watch Chronicles of Prophecy.
Thank you for joining us on this beautiful day with the president of the world.
And then you better find yourself with that grace
To prepare. The president that tells us the truth.
when you become conscious of certain things, you turn them on.
Reverend Dr. Chris Oyakilome.
I said, ask them about HIV and you will know who was responsible. Because there were things we said then. These are the parts from Chronicles of Prophecy.
The CDC, as of July, has never isolated the virus.
I've told you before, try your best to watch Chronicles of Prophecy.
If you say no quantified viral isolates are available, you've never isolated the virus from anybody with COVID-19.
When people were even still trying to figure out what exactly is going on, he already had the truth.
I asked the question then.
From day
one, who purified the virus?
They had no virus to make a test
As it stands, they don't even have a virus.
to find a piece of the virus.
We're dealing with satanic powers.
Therefore, their PCR test,
They never would have produced something that would kill them.
the test which is being used all over the world to document cases, is a complete fraud.
What are you testing for?
They don't have all the power that they think they have.
They have never isolated a virus
So the virus was not isolated.
and said, this is a unique piece of that virus,
And when I told you it didn't exist in nature,
because they have no virus.
it was true. That is why the wickedness is unrestrained.
People with doctorates and masters and all sorts of gowns that universities give for people that have graduated.
I like that way.
You know
I
what
like
I'm
the way
saying?
you put it.
Who are just following a script.
They were willing to answer the other questions. I said, no, you must start from here.
It doesn't make sense.
They already did a simulation of a pandemic from a variant of the family of coronavirus.
Here's a quote from Pfizer about making their RNA vaccine. To build an RNA vaccine, scientists do not need the actual virus.
That is a very clear statement that tells you that what they produced was not a vaccine for COVID-19.
In other words, Pfizer admits they have no virus with which to make a vaccine against.
They created it and patented it.
But there was no single identified novel coronavirus at all. As a matter of fact, not been novel for over 2 decades.
There's no better scientific document than the Bible, the Word of God. Who purified the virus?
And he gave all the reasons why you shouldn't take the vaccine.
A lie was perpetrated around the world, and people were stopped from being treated. And here was the interesting thing they said: no post-mortem from the beginning. I said that was a fraud.
Who already has started revealing the truth even from day one.
Once you isolate it, they will have access to the information on the virus, and they can prove the cure for the virus.
If you've never isolated the virus, you have no way of knowing whether it causes disease.
How did they come up with a vaccine?
So why are people dying?
It's very clear that nobody has ever isolated the virus.
If they dispute this thing,
It's a fraud.
show us the records of your isolated virus, period. But the world is about to move into verse 12. And the realignment of the word, which unbeknownst to the perpetrators of COVID-19 and the Great Reset, will culminate in verse 12. I want to read to you from verse 11 into verse 12. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest, remember that this is very important now. We're talking about what's about to happen to the world. It says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. As at the time of John, they hadn't received any kingdom. These are the same 10 toes of Daniel chapter 2. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. But look at the next thing. But receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So they're going to have a reorganization of the world. The world is going to be repolarized. It's currently polarized in a certain way, but that is going to change with this all-powerful seat in Europe. But then what the Bible tells us is that this is going to come into place the same hour with the beast. And many will not recognize that that is the beast. So a new structure will come in because they have devastated industries around the world. They have you don't know the level of destruction that has taken place by the perpetrators of COVID-19. Nothing like this has happened in our world. They killed more people by forbidding the hospitals from treating them and threatening the hospitals and scaring the people with fake news and denying the people of having accurate information because of what they wanted to do. And they destroyed so many. They've grounded many businesses that will never rise again. Why? Because they say they want a small population of the world and that most people should die. And because of that, they're insisting that it should continue. So the rearrangement of things, this next phase, the rearrangement of things, is going to bring about Revelation 17 verse 12. And along with the new structure will be the beast. But these 10 kings, these are leaders, will continue for a while, and many will not know that the beast also has gained the ascendancy together with them.
Well, this is Chronicles of Prophecy, and welcome to the show. I know that a lot of you have been asking, where have we been and when are we coming back on air? Well, guess what? We are right here and we are back. Praises be to God. In the month of visualization. Did you participate in yesterday's communion service? Because if you didn't, let me tell you something. You surely missed something that you didn't want to miss in your life. We are just moving from one level of great glory to the next level of higher glory. It's amazing what the body of Christ is doing, especially in these end times, as we chronicle the prophecies. And of course, I'm not alone. As always, I'm with my partners in my Father's business, and I'm happy to see you. Happy Monday. Congratulations, and welcome to the month of visualization.
Thank you. We are going to see pictures this month.
Are you seeing pictures
and we're
already?
going to be those pictures we see. Thank you so much for having me here.
What a beautiful message. I mean, this message wouldn't have actually come at a better time. What we see, it matters what we see. In these times that we're living in, what do we see? And to have the whole body of Christ, seeing what the Spirit is actually saying by the man of God is actually something that is very beautiful. So we're going to see changes. I'm seeing changes. In my locality, I'm seeing changes around the world.
Definitely.
Oh, wow.
And you know the icing that is actually there on the cake, particularly when you look at how the months have actually progressed. For example, you're looking at the previous month that we had, which was the month of praise, right? And a lot of thanksgiving was given, and then a lot of correction also came. When you look at it, remember, there's a narrative that is actually being pushed that those who belong to the Christian fold, they cannot make it, whether it's economics, it's health issues and the like. And Pastor started with the choir. I liked what he did with the choir. He started with the choir. And when you look at it, remember, the church had lost for quite a long time as a result of people that are being taken by the world because of either one or two gifts that they have. And he dealt with the choir. And then we get to find out that now, after we are done with the correction of how worship is supposed to be given to God, the church was given its right state. If you listen to the prophets that Pastor Chris gave yesterday, he said, and the church in your locality has been given a higher state than the governments of the world. And it's time for you to actually focus on the visualizations. And when you look on the visualization, you are telling us that you're looking at the design that is given. And the design has always been the church is higher than all the other mountains. And when you look at it, everything else is just definitely going to shape up with that. And no wonder we are happy to chronicle the prophecies as they're coming, because definitely something is happening, and it's happening according to what the church is actually stipulated.
Absolutely. Now, we know when we opened the program, we were talking about, in fact, we were reminding you about the prophecy that was given by our dear man of God, Reverend Dr. Chris Oyakilome, when he said, right now, the world is moving into a place of polarization. You have to have been living in a hole for you not to have seen that happening right from the time that he said it. Let's start with that, in actual fact, as our point of discussion. The polarization that is going on in the world right now.
Well, amazing things. We have a lot to say. I don't know whether you want to get in.
I mean, it's true, and it cannot be truer as we get to the time of the return of the Lord. The Lord said he will separate the sheep from the goat. Now, that word itself is a polarized statement. If you think about it, you have to sheep the sheep one side, and the goat. That is in itself polarization. So this is a time where, by the orchestration of things, some will go this way and others this way. And the state of affairs in the world, people who didn't know where they were, those people we call Chrislam, They weren't sure. They're not sure what kind of faith, what we're really doing. Now, they're seeing that there's actually no middle ground. Because now when they ask you, are you vaccinated? Are you not vaccinated? There's no middle ground in there. They don't even allow natural immunity as an answer. And when they say, are you doing services in person or not in person? They don't even accept online services as a question anymore.
Yeah.
In other words, some are going extreme in weakness and in conformity with the system, while some are going to the other extreme in saying, I'm going to stand on the name of Jesus.
That's it.
So that in itself is polarization.
True. And then when you look at, because that's the other polarization, of course, that we should be expecting. And I think, ever since we started praying, we got to find out that there are certain people we thought they were actually forward, and they're not. And then when you look at also world events, in fact, with world events, we can't even actually take the word just polarization. It's repolarization, because they are going back to a certain system that has been there. And when you look at that system, I was just thinking, for example, you look at what has actually happened with Afghanistan, right, and the Middle East. And then you look at what is happening with most nations, which many people are ignoring. Remember, we're speaking so much about the vaccines, and all of a sudden, the vaccine agenda seems to have failed. But there is something that is actually being introduced to the different countries. For example, you look at IMF and what it is actually giving in terms of the SDRs. You have a lot of money that is actually being given. And you ask yourself, are they printing this money? If they say they have got those 5 baskets of currencies, are they printing them? Or they are not printing them? And then at the same time, are they adding money to the economies, or they are actually causing the economies to be indebted to them? And then you look at the figure. Right now, it's the highest figure that they've actually had ever since IMF was actually started. They've actually the highest figure of SDRs that have actually been printed. And then you look at what Pastor was speaking about to say, the movement that is actually happening is a repolarization that is headed from Europe. And then it will take over. And as it is taking over, it will take over with the Antichrist. And you look at all the nations, there are many nations that are happy to receive a lot of money. I think I saw Nigeria was also happy to receive the IMF funds. Yeah. And it was bothering me a lot to say, are they in a debt crisis? You look at purchasing power parity compared to the 2 economies that you have in South Africa, in Africa, which is South Africa and Nigeria. Nigeria is actually doing way better. You look at the inflation, they're doing way better. And then they are receiving money that is piggybacked. Of course, it's being touted as loans that don't have to be tied to anything. But there's an interest that is there. They don't tell you that richer countries can take the same money and loan it to you. And then when you pay the interest, you pay it back to IMF, right? And then if you are a poor country or a poorer country, per se, if you take that, it's almost becomes tantamount to a loan at the end of the day. That means you pay interest on top of what IMF has actually given you. And then you look at, do they need it? Remember, we were speaking about how the vaccines or the vaccine manufacturers were actually calling for things like your national assets. Now we get to find out the same plan is being perpetuated. And it's quite interesting because when you look at it, the G20 just held, which is the repolarization Pastor was speaking about, to say, look at what the European Union is actually going to do. And you look at IMF. IMF right now is being headed from Europe. It's no longer being headed from America. The Bretton system is gone. And when you look at that repolarization, you can see definitely prophecies about to be fulfilled as far as that is concerned.
In fact, there's a lot of prophecies that are being fulfilled. But I want to hear from you first before I actually go on. I know you have been really looking at the separation and what is happening right now in terms of Christians being persecuted and how the other religions are also rising against the Christians, especially after we witnessed what happened in Afghanistan.
Yeah, so it's not just happening in Afghanistan. So there is a growth of these things. And from Europe, you've got your Hungary, you've got your Poland. They're also being pushed by the European Union when it comes to their value systems. So you can see that there is a push from the Antichrist spirit to undo or to do away with anything and everything that is Christianity. That is in Europe. Now you're looking at what's happening in Afghanistan right now, where you've got an increase in terms of the persecution of the body of Christ, and Christians now going further down underground because they're now concerned for their lives. But then some of them are actually saying that we are going to continue ministering the gospel. And it just begs the question of, if you are in a country where you're not being forced to recant or to not minister the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, what are you doing with the gospel? Because there are Christians in Afghanistan that have to actually put their lives at stake, literally.
Some have even lost their lives in the process.
Sunday, about 12 to 1 a.m., that message came that said some just died.
Yes.
So, but they died in joy. As a matter of fact, the message. So she was on a call while they were being killed.
Imagine that.
And yeah, saying, don't worry, we are bold. Your prayer is working. We are singing. They were singing in the spirit while being killed. So on the call, the gunshots could be heard.
Wow.
But they're like, don't, what they were saying, don't imagine. The people who are being killed were telling the people on the other side of the phone,
that don't worry about us.
Don't worry about us. We're good. Just pray for others. So yeah, it's happening. But previously, let's say if we went 20, 10, even 10, 20 years ago, when this kind of thing happens in places like the UK or EU and the United States, there's this sympathy for the government to do something about it.
Yes.
Now it doesn't exist anymore. So you can imagine they let them die, spirit. Just the same way people were dying in nursing homes in New York, and everybody was like, let's just hate on Trump for a while, let them die, right? And it's coming from two things. Number one, Biden is Biden. He did what he did, so Americans don't even want to know what's going on there. As a matter of fact, Americans are stranded, so not just Christians. But that is one. Two is, nobody talks about it, but it's very powerful critical race theory that's going on in the United States. Indoctrination to hate Christians.
To hate Christians.
As a matter of fact, I stumbled on a curriculum where there was a chart of oppressors and oppressed, right? And on the list of oppressors were Christians, and the list under the oppressed were Muslims, Hindus, and African religion. That means middle grade pupils and students, from middle grade to upper grades, even to colleges and universities in the United States, many kids are taught that Christians are oppressors, are haters, are bigots. So when these people hear that Christians were murdered in Afghanistan, Christians are having underground church in Iran, they're like, oh, that's cool.
Let me tell you what the polarization has actually done. It has given us that whole clear divide of who is for Christ and who is not.
Yeah,
even if you look at the virus itself, listen, it's laughable for you to be in denial that this virus is just a scam, and even to know that the vaccination is just a scam. We were speaking about how you now have to take a daily pill to support a vaccine that you have in your system.
If you don't know, now you know.
Now you know. Imagine that. And we're talking about how you have to get booster number 1, booster number 2, booster number 3, and it continues until when they deem it necessary that you don't need to have a booster. Does it even take rocket science for you to understand that you've been duped? That's what it is. So the polarization that we're seeing right now is a time, in fact, in your life where you have to make your standpoint clear. Yeah. Are you for Christ or are you against Christ? And if you are against Christ, you know what that means. It's the group that gets vaccinated. It's the group that persecutes the Christians. It's the group that does all the horrible things that we read about in the book of Daniel.
Yeah. True.
In Revelation.
True. Yes.
And then now the Christians are really fully experiencing the power of Christ at work.
Yeah. Definitely. And there is no doubt that, when you look at particularly the true church, because remember, it's another thing for you to look at the deep church, you might come up with different conclusions. But if you look at the true church, for example, just look at the ministry, you look at the Loveworld Nation, particularly ever since the COVID happened, you look at whether it's Rhapsody distribution or you're looking at the Healing School, which is no longer within the confines of buildings, it is now global. Right? Or you're looking at the kind of miracles that are actually being experienced, like we heard from Pastor Chris during the communion service. Yeah. Resurrections are happening, and they're happening in such a way that it's undeniable. For example, you have so many people that have actually called in to say, we were participating at a hospital where everyone can actually see, okay, you're connected to what? Okay, let's see this program. Let's see if it's actually going to pay off dividends. And then the dividends are actually coming out. And there is no doubt about it, particularly when it comes to, number one, the true church advancing, because remember, the true church will be advancing until it is actually caught up to be with the Lord.
Yes.
And of course, the deep church will actually dissipate into nothingness because they are being deceived as they're going. And when you look at it, this is exactly what Jesus Christ was actually saying when he spoke, for example, about the greater works, to say, greater works than I've done shall ye do in your times. And it will be indicative of that time to say, those who are perpetuating the days of Christ, those who are living the life of Christ, which is what we are, they're essentially going to go from one higher grace to another higher grace. And when you look at it, just imagine in a period where the church was supposed to have been restricted online, it was supposed to have been decimated. Because remember, behind this, there is an idea to say, we're getting rid of Christians, we are getting rid of the doctrine of Christ, the true doctrine of Christ. Because remember, they would like you to be indoctrinated by something else, but not be indoctrinated by the doctrine of Christ.
Of Christ,
And,
that's it.
and right now we're finding out the doctrine of Christ is triumphing. If the vaccines have failed, and
No,
mandatory
the
vaccines have
agenda
failed,
is now very clear. In fact, the issue of vaccines is something that you shouldn't even worry about. The issue of the COVID-19 is something that you shouldn't even worry about. I mean, Pastor Chris said it. He said right now, it's not even a time for you to be fearful about what they're planning on. It doesn't matter anymore because all their lies are out there.
True.
They will lie in red, in blue, in yellow, but the fact that they are lying, I mean, I was laughing when I found out that Dr. Fauci was even saying that, okay, maybe President Joe Biden needs to put a bit of brakes on his, push for mandatory vaccines. I said, I thought you guys are on the same camp.
That was after 2 top FDA personnel resigned. Like, we've gone so far, but we're not going any farther.
Yes, that's
so it's a debacle from that. I mean, that's the real word, debacle. I'm trying to find another word.
It is a debacle.
From that because like even these people can't even say the same thing anymore. And it makes it so laughable. But to point out something more about it, I mean, the book of Daniel, once again, let's say these things with a knowledge of the scripture and a knowledge of what is happening. It's easy to marry them. And talking about the deep church, the book of Daniel says, 11:32, those that do wickedly against the covenant of God were corrupted with flattery. And you see, that is what's happening in the deep church. Right? So they bring these guys and like, they call them mainstream preachers, they call them progressive Christians, they call them liberal evangelicals, they call them every nice names. You see, and that is what the Bible says. It said those who do wickedly against the covenant. How do you do wickedly against the covenant? Is when you swear to a covenant and you turn against that covenant. That means you said you are for Jesus, then you start going against. I mean, all you begin to do is go online, look for men of God who said this and talk against them. You never say what God said you should say. You just pick on other preachers. These do wickedly against the covenant. And what did the Bible say? It said they were corrupted with flattery. Because there are people who are giving them good likes, giving them high retweets, putting them on trending pages on Instagram. That is the flattery the Bible talks about. But in the same line, it says, but those that know their God shall be strong. So we will just keep doing, we will keep increasing in strength. Let them go for the likes and the clicks and the views on YouTube and Instagram. Why we'll keep doing what God wants us to do.
Exactly. So we want to take a look at some case studies that we want to show you today, of especially how this debacle has just turned out to be a disaster for the so-called perpetrators. A total disaster. Well, did you know that no one can ethically be forced to be vaccinated to continue to work? So the Nuremberg Code recognized this. The code dates back to, of course, after World War II, which most of you know. It's a set of medical ethics that led to the prosecution and execution of several Nazi doctors who carried out experiments on victims in concentration camps. One of the stipulations from the code is that the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. You heard that right? Absolutely essential. So this means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, of fraud, of deceit, of duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or cohesion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable them to make an understanding and enlightened decision. Well, here's Dr. Francis Boyle explaining that anyone can refuse, the injection based on the Nuremberg Code on medical experimentation.
Is vaccines, alleged vaccines, dealing with biological warfare agents, which COVID is, and for anthrax and botulinum was. That's how I first got involved here. So I started out by saying, by the authority of the Nuremberg Code on medical experimentation. Now that's a lot of background just for the beginning there, but I didn't want to write a scholarly treatise here or a law review article. I wanted something that ordinary people could read and understand, okay? And the word Nuremberg there, that I would think most people would have a general idea that the United States, the Soviet Union, France, and Britain prosecuted Nazis at Nuremberg so that people could understand the severity of the situation. Then I continue, I do hereby exercise my right under the Nuremberg Code to refuse to submit, so that people who were contacting me and saying, I need something to prevent taking these Frankenshots, they would have it. And, large numbers of employers are telling people now, well, you have to have these Frankenshots. And I've given them something that they can use to say, no, I'm not taking them. Indeed, I just heard from active duty military guy yesterday on this, and I sent it to him. And he said, "Take it. He's going to use it because they're giving it to people now in the military." And then the second prong, refuse to submit or to administer, so that healthcare personnel can use it. Doctors, nurses, healthcare workers, medical technicians. As you know, even here in the United States, they're having pharmacies do this, pharmacists, and they're even hiring other people to do it. We don't even know what their qualifications are. So I did it two-pronged so that it can be used by healthcare workers like Dr. Hewitt Vaughn to say, I'm not going to inject human beings with this Nazi Frankenshot. And I've already heard from healthcare workers thanking me, saying, this is exactly what I want, I'm going to use, and I will circulate it to my fellow healthcare workers. Then, I wanted to make it clear how serious this was. This wasn't a joke, it isn't a fraud. And I wanted to shake up anyone who was reading this notice that one of my clients, I guess you would put it, would give to their employer. And so I said, the United States government has prosecuted, convicted, and executed medical doctors who violated the Nuremberg Code on Medical Experimentation. Yes, that is correct. You can read the medical doctor's judgment. You should be able to find it online. And at the end of the judgment, they have the sentences of the convicted, and several of these doctors were sentenced to death.
All right, so we've got a lot of people now talking about the Nuremberg codes. You might have not understood how they work, but thanks to some legal practitioners that have really made this clear. And I like something that you say, that this is the reason why even governments have taken a kind of like a clever approach as to how they are forcing the mandatory vaccines. So the government is not coming out and saying that it is mandatory that you have to do it, right?
Yep.
So they're saying you have a choice, but that choice has not been made law. So now the corporates will now say, you can't do this. You want to fly, you can't do this without actually getting a vaccine. You want to buy something, you can't actually buy it without a vaccine. Like all sorts of crazy laws that they're introducing, all because they just want to push this. Some are even giving you incentives, $100, $200, maybe a Mercedes-Benz, and then you actually get vaccinated. I'm serious.
Get a chance at the raffle draw just to get the needle.
Yes, it is happening. It really is happening.
If you just retrace back into history, you want to actually find out what's the modus operandi of these groups, right? Aside from even actually going to the World Economic Forum or going to the different various, because remember, they're using this concept of 1,000 points of lies, right? And the lies that they're referring to, they're essentially those lies that will lead to them setting up the system that they want to actually set up. Just go back to the Nazi period and look at, for example, how many companies were also involved. They were helping the doctors, for example, in processing the data when they were busy exterminating the Jews, you get to find out the companies were not punished as much as the doctors. They were not punished as much as the politicians that actually participated. So the World Economic Forum actually saw that as a model, and they decided, right, so we are using this so-called private-public partnerships. But in essence, the private part of it is what we are pushing to actually do our bidding for us. Yeah. That's why you find out almost every other company that survived COVID-19, that was not destroyed, they have a reason for you to take the vaccine.
Yeah.
They have a reason for you to actually have a health pass, which they are saying is a COVID pass. And you get to find out that certain people were sent, because when they sat in their meetings, they agreed. So we as the politicians, we cannot actually do this because it becomes unconstitutional. The courts can come after us. But you are a private hand. And you know, private hands, sometimes you don't have jurisdiction to charge them in your country. You might actually have to take them to an international court. And that's why you find out they've decided the private sector. And if you look at it, every other politician is coming out to say there are no mandatory vaccines. In fact, it's unconstitutional.
Yes.
We are not involved.
But insurance can decide to increase your premium just because of something. And by the way, Pastor said it, when Pastor read, he did that over many phases and seasons where he said the sorcerers that were referred to in Revelations were pharmacare. Now, but when he said that, there's also something he said, when he said, for your merchants.
Yes.
Now, merchants, pharmacare, sorcery, which he talked about, but the merchants is the public-private cooperation. So it was not the beast that was driving it, it was the merchants trading. And the scripture says, and they made themselves rich from enterprises with you.
Yeah.
And just look at the numbers. If you look at the numbers between 2020 and today, the number below poverty line has doubled, right? And the number above in these corporations, if we just take people like the Bezos, the Elon Musk, just the amount of money they made alone from the stock, from buying stock and doing business at that macro level is so phenomenal, which is exactly what the Bible says. The merchants made money from it. And they, in turn, now pharmacare was the sorcerer, and Pastor explained this, why they are the sorcerer, both from the meaning of the word pharmacare and the role they play. So it's not going to be it's not going to be one man hitting the stick from a capital or a headquarters saying, you must take a mark when that time comes. But just get it. It's never going to happen that the government, and this is why to understand the Bible, the way Pastor breaks it down is very important. Yeah. These illustration Pastor puts over time, they're not happening in the spirit. They're happening right in front of us. And the ability to understand them in those nitty-gritty details, and you see them, you make your choices right. Like if you've been listening to Pastor in 2020, you should know that employers were going to do what they're doing.
Yes,
and you should have been making your decisions.
In fact, Pastor said it. If you listen to the message, Life is Spiritual, he says that if you read the Bible and you follow the Word of God, you would never be surprised at what is happening right now. Yeah. Because the Bible made it bare. Yeah. Right then, back then, during the time of the prophets, he made it bare that all these things are happening. Likewise, we know exactly where we are going, which is why we are confident. You were saying that some people are getting vaccinated because they want to travel. In an interview I had with Charles Barnabas just 2 weeks ago, Charles Barnabas claims that he's a Christian, but that him and his wife will actually get vaccinated if need be because they want to travel around the world and preach the gospel. So I said, so you'll get vaccinated to go preach the gospel of Jesus Christ? That's contradictory. But that is also polarization.
Yes.
Yep. You know how? We are getting to know the ones that read the word and understand the word. Yep. We are getting to know the ones that know their position when it comes to their life in Christ.
And then to also add to that, it's also showing that people are making decisions, like what Pastor Chris was actually showing us when he started explaining how they're using COVID-19 to kind of corner people into accepting certain policies that they're introducing, like giving people the vaccine. Because it shows that people are now being cornered to accepting something that ordinarily they would not have accepted. If someone is making a decision to say, I just want to travel, it means it's not for health purposes. That means in their logic, in the way that they reason, they're seeing that this thing is not exactly what the government is saying. It's not really as dangerous as the government is making me to believe, but because I want my life to get back, and this is exactly where they were cornering the people. And this is what Pastor Chris was saying, that people are being deceived or they're being forced into accepting something that they would ordinarily not accept. Like what we're seeing, people being forced to take vaccinations, and now they're taking the governments to court.
That's it. So similarly, Dr. Simon Gold from America's Frontline Doctors discusses some important topics regarding the experimental COVID injection. Have a listen to what she had to say.
Whatever you call it, it's experimental. It's not been approved as a vaccine. AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. One of the most commonly known complications of vaccines is something called antibody-dependent enhancement. It's also sometimes called immune enhancement, and it's sometimes called pathogenic priming. What this is instead of really causing immunity, it causes a person to overreact in a negative way if they should ultimately be exposed to the virus. The biggest problem with antibody-dependent enhancement, we see this with prior coronavirus vaccines. So when they were doing the studies with SARS-CoV-1 vaccine back in 2005, they came up with a vaccine and they gave it to the ferrets, and it was 2-dose like the ones today, and the ferrets did fine after the first dose, they did fine after the second dose. Later they exposed them to the coronavirus SARS-CoV-1 in the wild, and the ferrets died. That's why SARS-CoV-1 vaccine never came to market. There's been a tremendous failure of previous coronavirus vaccines. This is not well known, but there are multiple coronavirus viruses out there. For example, in 2002, there was an epidemic, a much smaller one, but an epidemic of SARS-CoV-1. What we're in right now is SARS-CoV-2. This coronavirus is 78% identical to SARS-CoV-1. So prior coronavirus vaccine attempts have been made. They have failed. They can't do it safely in human beings. There's no independently published animal studies. One of the companies says they do have animal studies, but they haven't published any data on it. There's been a complete rush to put this to market, and you simply cannot do this safely without published data on animal studies, because animals often will die at the end. One of the problems that we doctors are concerned about this antibody-dependent enhancement potential, which again, I'm not saying it exists or it doesn't exist, I'm saying it hasn't been answered, is if you're going to run around and give this vaccine to a whole bunch of healthy people, you have to be really, really sure. Taking a vaccine is very different than taking a drug for a disease. If you have a disease, you're certainly willing to take on more risk, right, to get rid of the disease. But vaccines are typically given to healthy people. Now, what's going to happen if you give this vaccine to 100 million people that are otherwise healthy, and they do have this antibody-dependent enhancement reaction, because we haven't ruled it out, they do get exposed to the virus in the wild, and 30% of them drop. And what if, for example, you've given that vaccine to all of your healthcare workers, and you've given that vaccine to all of your military and all of your police officers? This particular virus has very low lethality. Should you give it to healthy people, not knowing the answer to that question is far too risky, in my opinion, from a national security perspective.
We've already witnessed a lot of injuries, a lot of deaths, permanent injuries that could never be reversed again, ever. In fact, if you were following media, you would find, that is real media, you would find that there's a lot of people that are now regretting why they took the vaccine. They're actually encouraging other people that have not been vaccinated to stand their ground. Yeah. While we all know that the next bigger step of polarization will be that, Michael, the unvaccinated will be blamed.
Yeah, we were saying during the break, it's already taking shape. You probably have seen, you've seen a glimpse of what's going to happen towards the end of the year in 2022, and that is that as you begin to see the effects, you heard that woman there say the effects, injuries, and the immune system is being degraded. Now, it's no longer conspiracy theory. People now know that. But just like they blamed the unvaccinated for the variants, which doesn't make sense in logic, and I'm going to explain that. When these things start happening, they would blame the unvaccinated again, right? And just to chip in, during the last week, the CDC changed the meaning of vaccinated to mean someone who has been vaccinated greater than 14 days. Oh, okay. So what I'm gonna do?
Can you imagine that?
I'm going during the break. I'm gonna send you the CDC guideline on that. So when they say, according to the CDC, if someone has injury, side effects, anything 14 days after taking the shot, he is demographically, and I mean statistically, classified as unvaccinated. So in other words, he got the injury, he got the side effect as an unvaccinated person. I'm telling this guy didn't came last week.
But you see, the thing is, they keep on telling us that this next variant is much more deadlier than... But we've never really seen the deadliness of the deadly variant in the beginning.
It's called mold.
The unvaccinated are not even dying or even getting infected.
Yeah.
By
because
any of their variants.
The issue has got nothing to do with the virus. It has nothing to do with the vaccinations. It has everything else to do with control.
Yeah.
Remember, if you get back to the picture that we were shown by Pastor Chris when he was showing us how those who believe in one world government, they would want to actually set up themselves. And you showed us from the triangle that is actually used on the US dollar, and then from their different secret societies. There's one thing that is synonymous with them actually achieving. They have to effect totalitarian control of everyone.
Yep.
And they're just looking for reasons. If you look at it, right now the vaccine agenda is failing. Of course, they keep on trying to say the deadly or more deadlier variant is actually coming on board and all this thing. And then those
so that you take the boosters.
So that you take the boosters. And then, by the way, they are already doing so many things because behind them there is also a message that they would want to actually bring. Remember, they believe that men and machines are the same. They are equal. So they start speaking about terms like equality, equity, and all that. But in reality, what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, we'll get rid of men as much as we can. That's the depopulation agenda. If they can do it with vaccines, they also have got other means to actually achieve the same, right? And on the other side, they would say if men and machines are equal, we need to actually create a transhumanistic kind of man that can actually coexist.
So man should
so at the end of the day, you're looking at a case where right now, this experiment that they are doing, which they have come out openly, if you look at the documents that came from Canada to say it will end in 2024 into 2025. And then 2025, they have another one. Remember, they said SPARS will be there now to be killing so that they can achieve Agenda 2030. Right. You're looking at a case where right now, you have the largest experiment that is being carried with controls. Those who are unvaccinated, they are also a control group. Yep. Those who are vaccinated are essentially what the experiment is actually being run on. At the end of the day, by the time they get with all these boosters, they would have actually seen whether they have depopulated enough. They have also achieved the program of transhumanism on the other side. So,
and in addition to that, this polarization also dries out certain political leaders to bring in certain political leaders that they want in places. We're already seeing this happening in different countries as it is already.
Yeah, and the drive is such that it's everything control. Look at it this way. When the Democrats were actually campaigning to get into office, part of their campaign was to say, oh, we are pro-choice when it comes to things to do with abortion and stuff.
Not to needle in your body.
Exactly, yes. So others were saying, no, we are pro-life. And they're saying that people should be given the right to actually choose what happens to their bodies when it comes to matters to do with abortion. But when it comes to the needle and receiving the injection of COVID-19, they are not pro-choice. They are pro-mandate, which is double standards. They're playing double standards with medicine and with the choice that people are supposed to have when it comes to choosing what happens to their own bodies. So when the conversation does not suit them, they drive a different agenda. When it suits them, they drive a different one. Right now, they want to force everybody to be vaccinated. Then they're saying you cannot make a choice. So it tells you exactly the kind of leaders that are in office that are actually being pushed, and you can see who's actually pushing them.
You know, Pastor said something. If we go back to the very first phase, Pastor said, why are people dying?
Yes, that was a question
And
he
he
asked.
said, people are being left to die.
True.
They are being
It's not-
neglected,
yes,
and
and
they are not being allowed their right to be
They're
treated,
not being treated
when they can
and
be
not even
treated.
I mean, there's one that they refuse to treat you, but in some cases they don't want you to treat yourself. They're both cases. I mean, last week, I mean, during the weekend, it was on Fox where Candace Owens, because of her position on the vaccine,
Yeah, she was
went
denied.
to be tested, and they say we're not even going to
Test you.
So. And anytime they refuse to treat
That is deep
somebody-
polarization right there.
That is more polarization.
Yeah.
And you see, anytime someone, they're like, this guy doesn't like vaccines. Okay, he comes to the hospital. They want to accelerate the demise of that person so that they can use them as the next scapegoat, that those who don't get vaccinated.
Yes, we're making an example of what happened to Candace Owens.
Exactly.
Now, I want us to talk about what happened in Afghanistan, or what is happening in Afghanistan. We have been praying for Christians in Afghanistan because we know exactly, in the Middle East, Christianity is not freely practiced. So now having a Taliban rule in a country, that can only spell disaster and, of course, persecution for Christians. But right now we are joined by Raid Debi. Raid Debi is also, well, he lives in the Middle East. And I know the question that we asked is, now that America has taken the stance in Afghanistan and we've seen a Taliban rise up again, I'm sure if you're a Christian, you can relate to prophecy, right? When it speaks about the Middle East and, of course, the feet of Islam and all sorts of things. So he's going to be joining us via video call. But as we get ready for him there, I just want to take another case study. So in a clip shared online, a group of officers can be seen racing through a subway station in full riot gear. The police were recorded in a clash with two female protesters who were reportedly in breach of the restrictions. During the tussle, one police officer can be seen repeatedly hitting one of the women with a baton. On Saturday, protesters took to the streets in Lyon in large numbers, with police reportedly firing tear gas in a bid to prevent the march's progress. Footage of social media shows hundreds of demonstrators making their way through streets black with tear gas. Please note that the following is not for sensitive viewers.
Gardez les distances. Reculez, reculez, on recule. Sortez là, vous voyez pas qu'il y a un cordon de travail. Non, monsieur, vos collègues m'ont autorisé de travailler. Non, s'il vous plaît, monsieur. Non, je suis sur. Non, non, j'ai rien fait. Monsieur, monsieur. Non, mais je travaille, monsieur, mais vous faites quoi?
Let me tell you what this speaks to. If people would sit back and relax and think that the government is going to change their restrictions or anything to favor the so-called rights of citizens, it's not going to happen. It's going to have to be a fight.
Yep.
And that is what we're seeing. Those were not the only protests that happened over the past few days. It wasn't only in France. We saw also quite a number of European countries go back again to the streets. Spain was one of them. UK, obviously one of them. Nurses in different parts, of the world also protesting against this.
Yep.
It shows you that something definitely is not right. But if you are to sit and just wait for something to happen, it's not going to happen. You see, this will only widen the gap of polarization.
Yep.
So these women were being attacked because they didn't follow restrictions.
Yeah.
There was one lady who actually got beaten up and was put in prison because she wasn't wearing a mask.
Yeah. So the government is playing the arbiter of creating the divide in people by their statements. And they've got their officials, like the police officials who are there to maintain law and order in a country. They've put a law which does not make sense, when it comes to COVID-19, but then they've got officials that are going to enforce it. And then there are those that have been deceived by the same government officials who have politicized the whole idea of health, as we are seeing with COVID-19. And now there is a divide where you've got those who do not want to get vaccinated and those who are saying people need to be vaccinated. And the government is now pointing fingers to say, no, you guys who are not vaccinated are now the problem because you're the ones who are continuing to actually continuously allow the variants to continue, right? And the polarization is actually happening in such a way that the government is now enforcing to say, you are the problem, these guys are the good guys. Now the good guys in the eyes of the government are now going to start seeing the people that are not getting vaccinated as the problem. So we are seeing Mr. Government playing the role of the divider of people. And like what you're saying, Yvonne, if people think that this is going to end, like what Pastor Chris was saying, think again. They are not about to stop. They want to actually go after you. They're coming after your rights. You can only stop them when you actually start praying and when you start taking a stand.
Yeah.
And
That's
when
it.
you start saying, number one, I will not fear, they hate that. They hate the necessary fact that you refuse to be scared. They have screamed fire all over the world, but some people are like, I'm just cool. And that alone makes you an offender in their eyes. True. Because if you don't fear, you cannot be controlled.
That's true.
So everything you say, like somebody met me and I'm going to church, like, what if you get the COVID? Like, I'll treat it like I've treated everything. It's going to go away. Are you serious? What's the big deal? Like, you see, what you've just done is, you've said, there could be COVID, but I'm not going to give my life for it, and I'll deal with it like I've dealt with every other thing. And they're like speechless. Like, this guy he listens too much to propaganda. Like, what is propaganda about that?
Yeah.
I asked the person, so what if it were cancer? What would you do? I said, I'll do what I've always done. And what do you always do? I pray and I take pills. Like, is that what you're going to do? Oh, God. So you're not scared enough for the moment.
Yeah.
And that makes you a problem to these guys.
It's quite interesting that, those who don't want to participate, they're actually being, because it's the same tactic that was actually done in the past way. It's us versus them.
Them, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And when you look at it, for them to set up this world which is totalitarian, they need to create a certain group of people that are called us so that they can take over. But when you look at it, they're actually going for everyone else who represents, because behind this, if you look at it, the globalists that are actually there at the World Economic Forum, behind everything else that they say, whether it's stakeholder capitalism or it's them saying we want to actually come with pandemic aid and the like, they have an idea to take away God from society.
Oh.
Why? Because God gives you the freedom
That's
of
Alice
choice.
Bailey's plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now they are essentially going for, because they know if you get into any country, there's a high chance that anyone who is a patriot is a Christian or is actually coming from God's system. Anyone who likes family and who likes the setup of family, how it is actually set up, they are most likely going to be from either the Judeo-Christian standpoint of things. And right now they're coming out with different other things that they can actually do. Because when you look at globalization, it's actually going to be effective on so many things. I was just reflecting on how Joe Rogan, he got COVID and he went and treated himself with ivermectin. And then they were saying...
And some people are just angry that he got healed.
D, zinc, everything.
Now, some people are just angry that somebody can get COVID and get fined in less than 3 days without taking the vaccines. So they would have preferred he died so that they celebrate and get others to take the vaccine.
Yeah.
So you can see that benign, soft wickedness.
Yep.
Like it or not, when somebody is happy or is sad because another person got alternative treatment, it is nothing but animalistic wickedness.
True.
And like it or not, it's your liberals that are coming up with this. How can you be angry? I mean, if somebody who says he is my enemy gets healed, I am cool. But these guys like,
Michael.
you got healed and you didn't take the vaccine. And you know what, there was, I mean, TV show hosts were saying things like, he wasn't really COVID positive. He lied in the first place. I mean, people on mainstream media. And what is it again? It comes down to if you say what they want you to say, you get praises.
Yeah.
And that is it. Remember what was said, Daniel 11:32. Those who did against the covenant were corrupted with flattery.
Yeah.
And flattery is a sweet thing. Everybody wants to be flattered just once in a little while. But it is that corruption. When you sell yourself into that flattery, it corrupts. What's the alternative? Those that know their God. Because when you know your God, I mean, imagine it. Imagine this miracle that took place in over 9 years. Pastor said it in the two phases ago. He said in 2012 was when the Lord turned him to look at the internet. I keep saying that was the year of the big miracle.
Thank God.
In
for
my
such.
opinion, I look at things very differently. So in my opinion, 2012 was the year of the miracle. Because if God saw things that would happen years ahead and said, man, dude, forget about TV now. Just focus on it. And I remember I had my opinions then. I was like, Pastor, going into Yokus? Believe me, I'm going to confess it on air. I was like, are you sure about this stuff? But I did not understand until he said it 2 phases ago that the Lord told him in 2012.
And
So
look at the benefits of it
and just
now,
imagine
especially with this polarization that the world is in.
When did God do the miracle that makes, Pastor, we have this platform, we can say these things? It was in 2020.
Imagine that.
It was in 2012.
Yes.
And that is for somebody who knows his God, who was not listening to the flattery.
Not somebody who say, I will get vaccinated first for me to go and listen to God. You see now?
A man of God was saying, literally, that Pastor Chris should be taken off air.
Well, unfortunately,
Off
there's no
social
air
media. Off social media.
There's no off social media to take him off.
God dealt with that question like 2012.
And there's no air to take him off.
too
Beautiful. And that's why we're here, right?
Indeed. And the interesting part about those who think this is about vaccines, they will actually have a rude awakening because they have 1,000 points of light to achieve this idea that they want to actually achieve. And they will be trying time and time again as long as the church is still here, right? When the church gets off, obviously, when we take off in the first flight, then they can actually set themselves up. So aside from vaccines, because right now they have the vaccine agenda, they are still just, slowly just, borrowing on it. They're already looking at some other things, like how do we cause the nations, all of them to converge? All right.
Economically.
Can we give IMF, can they actually give these loans that are not loans? And then how do we bring every nation, because when you look at it at the end of the day, every nation that indebts itself to the IMF, they are giving over their national assets.
Now imagine what will happen if the world is experiencing this polarization now. What then will happen after the 1 year or the 2 years, when in actual fact you cannot deny anymore for sure that this vaccine was actually never a vaccine? Well, because I think the after effects of it will be so dire.
Of 2 years, I was with somebody that Sia. An employee of his went to actually get a vaccine. Immediately when they were done, it was in the same day they had to actually be taken to the clinic, Santon Medic Clinic, and then they had to take him to actually a general hospital. He is not fine as we are speaking today. And this is somebody that, in the previous weeks we were actually telling me, hey, don't take this vaccine. So you're looking, because remember it's a wide experimental process that they're actually doing, right? In the process, the experimental process is supposed to run from when they started in 2020 to when they get to 2024, like they said, with the boosters, different boosters. Some people are mistakenly actually getting the experimental jab as it is, raw as it is, and then some are being left for either the 3rd dose, 4th dose as they're going, until they get to the dose that they would actually want to give to somebody. And then they're doing it in such a way that it doesn't become so suspicious. For example, if you take everyone, the whole population, if all of a sudden they start having side effects, obviously, people can actually pinpoint to say this. So you have some people that are coming out to say, I took 2 jabs, I'm still fine, because they were given something else totally different.
Yeah, but then just give them time.
Yeah, it's
just give them time.
Chronicle of Prophecy, I said that I think the safest jab, the safest vaccine was the 1st dose. Because, reason why?
They were trying to convince people.
I said it, like I said it
They were trying to convince people that it is good for you.
If you're really going for the safest one, it should have been the ones of 2020. Because that is the one they want to make sure more people come.
I argue that though.
Yeah.
I argue that, and here's my argument. In an investigation that we're still doing, we will show it to our viewers. There were people that got jabbed in 2019. And they were told that there was a flu that was coming, so you needed to be ready for it. So when that flu comes, you're not going to get the flu. And then some people were told that it had something to do with HIV and what, only later to read the fine print and then realize that something was not right.
Yeah.
Pastor asked the question, what did they do with HIV? I'm really waiting to hear the depth of that story because that is going to match an investigation that we're carrying. There were people that were jabbed in 2019. And when they were jabbed in 2019, they are sickly. They are so sickly, you won't believe if you see them. They are before pictures and they are now pictures. I said, are you sure you're the same person? They are the same person. So this has been a trick that was there even before. I mean, but I would maybe, agree with you when you now say maybe the first one in 2020, especially when they started speaking about COVID-19, because they were still trying to cohese a lot of people to come and get the jab.
Look at the authoritarian now. The Israelites COVID has said, timesofisrael.com said it clearly that vaccines are the new way of life. And I quote, expect it once every 5 months or 6 months. That means you should get COVID vaccines twice a year. Now, remember, I always say this, don't trust people who have lied before. Like I said, Pastor has been consistently correct from day one. So who should you trust in the news? Is it CNN that has been consistently wrong?
Of course not.
Or someone that has been consistent? Don't reward a liar with more trust, right? Until he changes his ways, at least, right? But in this case, we said it, number one, it's never going to end, and now it's coming out. And this is what they're going to do to people. They will take you to the point where it becomes your life's choice not to go back.
Oh, whoa.
You get to the point
yeah.
where you will now need the fourth. We looked at that documentary together where they now said by how much it's destroying the immune system. By the way, COVID is not the only disease. So your immune system, the immune system of the human body, does not repair itself, or how do they call it? I've forgotten the medical name. Itself does not repair itself only for COVID. It repairs itself for everything. Sure. But once they have endangered your immune system, so it's no longer COVID you're worried about.
No, it's
you're
a
worried
lot
about
of things.
a lot more stuff. So they're going to give you another kind of booster that you would need, and if you don't, you become susceptible to even more diseases.
Okay,
at that time, it becomes a problem.
I want you to hold that thought because our video caller is online now. So we want to talk about the Middle East quickly. You see, what is happening in Afghanistan is a serious cause for concern. Listen, if you thought that maybe this is a story of certain people or a group of people that have just been targeted and affected and it won't affect you, well, you might want to think again. But before I switch on to Rahid Derby right there, who is in Palestine in the Middle East, President Donald Trump called the Afghanistan disaster a military surrender from a former military commander to the other. That spells out weakness on the incumbent. So who wants America weak and for what purpose? The biggest culprit from a spiritual position is the devil himself. Yes, that is right, Satan. So that is because a weakening America means a vulnerable Israel. And vulnerable Israel is a sport on prophetic foretelling of Prophet Ezekiel's chapter 38 events of the end times. What this means is that America is weakening at a very fast pace, indicating how the devil is trying to move faster because he is aware his time is fast running out. From a geopolitical perspective, Biden's poor decision opened up the region to exploitation by the Chinese Communist Party, the king of the East. CCP-backed tabloids were quick to label the disastrous exit from Afghanistan U.S. humiliation. For China, for United States failure in Afghanistan is more than an opportunity to freshen their propaganda. So the Chinese government is already backing the Taliban terrorists as a legitimate government and are raining down economic support through the Belt and Road Initiative deals. U.S. departure practically handed Beijing unfettered access to Iran via historic Silk Road routes through Afghanistan. Once again, Biden's weak leadership put China's interests above the U.S. Though Biden and his administration are doing everything in their power, I'm not sure which power though, to make this latest crisis disappear and apportion blame to others, some Americans are waking up to the reality of what disaster they elected in office. For Christians, the story is different. One day you can openly minister salvation in the gospel of Jesus Christ. The next day, you are forbidden. In fact, you will die if you do so. That is the ransom all Christians in Afghanistan are already paying. Well, let's quickly listen to this before we cross over to Rahid.
سلام خواهر آقای عزیز، امیدوار هستم که شما جوری سلامت باشید. ما امروز در افغانستان اولین روزی سیاه در زیر حکومت طالبان را شروع کردیم. من نمی‌فهمم که آینده از این مملکت، آینده از این ملک چه خواهد شد. واقعا قلب ما درد دارد. واقعا احساسات ما روی کنترل نیست. میخواد که 20 سال به این زحمت کشیده شد. تمام دستاوردهای 20 ساله ما در یک شب حتما نم. فقط خدا میفهمد که ما چقدر درد داریم، چقدر قلب من ناآرام است. ما یه اشوای گریه به بخاطر ترس نیست، بخاطر که قلب درد گرفته که مملکت ما، مملکت زیبای ما به دست یک گروه وحشی افراطی یافتاده بود. تمام ارزش‌هایی که برای از مملکت بود از بین رفت. کل دنیا امروز ما را تنها گذاشتن. همون دنیایی که میگم ما حامی پشتیبان شما هستیم. در بدترین شرایط، در سخت‌ترین شرایط مردم افغانستان را تنها گذاشتن رفتن. و نمی‌فهمم که وضعیت چی میشه. آیا ما در دل حکومت طالبان چه قسم سپری بکنیم؟ امروز ویدیو رو برای شما دوستان عزیز ثبت می‌کنم. در تاریخ می‌خوایم بماند. می‌خوایم بماند که دوستان شما، عزیزان شما در الله امروز تنها و تنها در میدان باقی مانده. ما میدان رو رها نمی‌کنیم. هستیم. با قوت بیشتر مبارزه می‌کنیم، در کار خداوند ادامه می‌دیم. اما این رو بدانید اگر این روزی که نبود دور هم بود دیگه ما در بین شما نبودیم، یک حرفای از قلب ما، از قلب نامده ما برای شما باقی بماند که چقدر این روز برای ما سخت تمام میشه. اگر کسی از ما باقی ما، اگر فرزندهای ما، اولادهای ما باقی ما، پای شما از شمایی است که تنهایشان رو نگذارید، احوالشان رو بگیرید، نگذارید تنها بمانید. ببخشید که احساساتی شده قلب ما درد دارد. این رو به عنوان یک یادگار برای تمام شما دوستان میفرستم. امیدوار هستم که جور و صحتمند باشید. در پناه خداوند، در پناه پدر آسمانی باشید. تشکر.
It is the saddest thing to see what is happening with the Christians in Afghanistan. It is the saddest thing. There's so many stories that have even gone unreported of what has happened, like you're saying, in a phone call where you're actually on a phone call to people that are being executed. Can you imagine that? But I just want to help our viewers understand what this means, though, for the people living in the Middle East. So we're joined by Raid Debi, who is live from Palestine in the West Bank. Raid, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me with you today. Thank you for having me with you today. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Now, Rayed, we know that it is news right now of the Americans' troop withdrawal in actual fact from Afghanistan after about 20 years of controlling the Taliban in that particular country. But we also know that, you know, the Middle East has been ravaged by the Taliban attacks and the Taliban, you know, Sharia laws that they want to impose on people. And of course, what is happening in Afghanistan right now is really nothing new to the Middle East. But I would like to know from you, being a resident within the Middle East, what does it mean for America to actually withdraw from Afghanistan, and then the Taliban government is the one that is in control right now? What does it mean for the region of the Middle East as a whole?
First of all, there is a lot of facts has been shown after the withdrawing of the American occupation on Afghanistan. The first, that America as superpower is not the fate of the people. The withdrawing of the American occupation from Afghanistan shows very clearly that Taliban became as a model for a lot of Muslim people all over the world. And it shows that America could be defeated. This is number one. Number two, that shows very clearly that what so-called state building model that America invests hundreds of billions to create a state, to create an army, to create a kind of fake model of state could be destroyed in the very first test. And that's what happened with Taliban fighters. As we've seen, less than 80,000 fighters came from what so-called caves, has defeated one of the most modern armies in Middle East, which has been invested by the American administrations, and hundreds of millions has been invested in the Afghani army. And now we have witnessed live that this kind of very modern weapons has been left on the streets of Afghanistan for Taliban and for the people. The third thing, I think, after defeating ISIS in Iraq, in Syria, this winning for Taliban could give hope and could inspire the new Islamic Sunni movements in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and that could inspire them to get the model of Afghanistan or to refresh their activities again. This is on the ideological and field issue, but as well in the geopolitical vision, it is very clear that the whole vision and the whole picture has been affected in Middle East, especially that we heard recently that the Turkish government proposed to protect the airports in Afghanistan. And as you see, it could be, and it could strengthen the relation between Turkey and Afghanistan as two Sunni powers in Middle East. That could give another power for Qatar as a moderator in this conflict and as acceptable broker for this conflict from the both sides, for the Americans and for the Talibani leadership as well. And that could affect negatively a lot of what's called the American camp players in Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and the other powers that they depend and rely completely on the American protection on the area.
Yeah.
So I think that we're passing turning point in the geopolitical scene in Middle East. And I think the impact of this change could appear very soon within the Islamic political groups, especially in Syria and in Iraq.
So does it put you in a place of safety? What does this mean, though? I know that talking about geopolitics, you know, Syria has completely been decimated by a war that has gone on for over a decade now. And then we've got Iran, we've got Iraq, we've got Palestine, which is where you are right now. We have an Israel that has been fighting to protect its territory and its borders, right, from enemies. But having those Taliban kind of like leaders rise up into power and, you know, taking over control. In fact, what they've actually said is they vowed that America should never even think of coming back again because this will be serious trouble. In other words, it almost seems like maybe there will be no end to a Taliban government. I don't know, but, you know, different things can happen in the future. But does it bring any stability to your country, specifically Palestine, and maybe to even other Middle East countries?
Well, first of all, it was not the first defeating
For, you know,
for
other
America.
Middle East countries. While we know that at large, Middle East is more of like an Islamic territory.
Us the withdrawing of the American troops from Lebanon, from Somalia, from Iraq. So it is not the first time that we see America defeated in front of the willing of people, the willing of resistance, the willing of fighting the American occupation worldwide. So I don't see that as a new phenomena, the withdrawing or the weakness of the American military power in Middle East. But for us as a Palestinians, we don't see as Taliban as a model, as a role model for us, because first of all, we want to end the occupation and to have a Palestinian independence democratic state. So we don't believe in a state based on religion. We don't believe on a dictatorship regimes. We don't believe in authoritarian regimes. So for us, we are very concerned about the new model of ruling, which could appear very soon in Afghanistan. Afghani people are our brothers and our sisters, and we want them to have a freedom of the American occupation. But the model we want to see in Afghanistan is a democratic model. Again, as we see, this could show that the unlimited supporting to Israel, as America did with Afghani, could show very clearly that if the American administration wants stability or security for Israel, so the best way is to convince and to push Israel to end its occupation, because as we've seen, the hundreds of billions in Afghanistan for the government did not protect the Afghani government. It did not showing any kind of stability or any kind of development. So I think America should review all of its policies in Middle East, and it should understand very well that the willing of people is more strong than the F-16 and the military power. And I think it is the time for America to understand very well that if they want to protect Israel as their ally in Middle East, they have to push them to end their occupation and to be a normal state, not apartheid state in Middle East, because the apartheid system has been ended in South Africa once and forever, and we don't want to see more apartheid systems in Middle East.
Okay, Rahid, I think because of time, I'm going to have to cut you short there quickly. My colleague here has a question for you.
So, Rahid, I have a question. So, concerning the state of Israel in the Middle East, we know the position of the Al-Qani network. That is one. Secondly, we know the Al-Qani network is currently in Syria. And we know the Al-Qani network is also a partner of the Taliban alongside Al-Qaeda. So what if, with the success of the Taliban, the Al-Qani network from Taliban in Syria is trying to offer help to the Palestinians to kind of, now you said you don't want that model, but they're offering a model which, in their opinion, has succeeded in has succeeded in Afghanistan. Now they're saying, we are close by, they are not far, they're in Syria, Al-Qani network is there. What if they say to the leaders of the Palestinian Authority, we want to help?
And what will be Hezbollah's stance?
Yes.
Because Hezbollah is very much present in Palestine.
What do you think the leaders of the Palestinian Authority will do in that situation?
Well, first of all, our policy as Palestinians is very clear. We don't interfere in the others' policies, and we are very interested not to be infected in the situation in the neighboring countries. I understand that it is could be not rational and not logical, but for us, what we have in Palestine is completely different model. What we have in Palestine is non-violence and popular struggle against the Israeli occupation. And what we have in Palestine is a very clear vision, a Palestinian independent state based on democratic principles and the respecting of international law and human rights. So as Palestinians, we will always do everything possible in order to protect our people away from this radicalization and from this radical ideology. But I have to remind you, my friend, that what increased the radical thoughts in Palestine is not the winning of or the victory of Taliban in Afghanistan. What increased the disappointment and the hopeless of the Palestinian people is the daily apartheid that we face. You can imagine that, for example, I represent the fourth generation in Palestine under occupation. In order to reach my work in Ramallah on a daily basis, I have to pass through 4 Israeli apartheid checkpoints. Sometimes it takes 4 hours instead of 1 hour. We lose our brothers, our sisters, our mothers in the Israeli jails or as victims of the Israeli apartheid. So this is the main reason of radicalization in Palestine and in the other countries. I think it is important always to check and to analyze the effect of what's going on in Afghanistan on the Palestinian scene, but we should never neglect the elephant which filling the Palestinian room, which saying very clearly that the main source of radicalization and hopeless in Palestine is the occupation. It feeds the Palestinian disappointment feeling. And I think that in order to avoid any kind of radicalization in Palestine, we need to end the occupation and need to avoid
So
end this apartheid.
let me bring the point
that
home.
we need. This is the.
Let me bring the point home. Just give me a moment. Just give me a moment. Just give me a moment. So we know right now that the Hamas, for instance, is partnering with Iran. So the idea that you don't partner with other forces, it's not really true, because most of the longer range missiles that Hamas used in the last operations were not from within Gaza. They came from Iran. That means there's also a possibility that if the Arcani network says, hey, we want to cooperate with you, we can use a certain model, the idea that they will say, no, it's not true. It's open. Because towards the end of the last operation, they called for help from Hezbollah in the north. So that is the model I am trying to open to you.
To answer in literally 1 minute. 1 minute.
For information, I don't know if you are very familiar with the Palestinian geopolitical life. Gaza is the biggest prison all over the world. So it is very funny what you're saying, that they sending us missiles from Iran. We don't have borders with Iran. The only border we have is with Israel and with Egypt. So what we have in Palestine and what Hamas having, it is not real rockets. It is a kind of defensive rockets or missiles that Hamas is trying to improve in Gaza. But when you speak about Israel, you're speaking about a nuclear power. So this relation between Hamas and Iran, yes, it is there, but you have to take in consideration that Hamas is a political party in Palestine. Hamas is not a ruling party in Palestine. Palestine is ruling by PA. Palestinian is ruling by Mahmoud Abbas, who's clearly saying that he respects international law and respect UN resolutions. And in a daily basis, he is asking for respecting international law and saving the lives of both people in the both sides, Palestinians and Israelis. The second thing, again, my friend, I think you cannot and you should not neglect the elephant in the room and telling me about Hamas reactions. What Hamas doing in Gaza is a reaction of the Israeli crimes against our babies, against our people, against the lack of clean water, the lack of food, the lack of medicine in Gaza Strip. Of course, when you live under this situation, you will react. International community should stop their hypocrisy. It is the time to call things in the right way, to say what's going on in Palestine is apartheid, and to say that instead of looking to the reaction, you should start the story from A, not from Z to A. You should start counting from 1 to 10, not from 10 to 1. So what Hamas doing in Gaza is a reaction.
Because of time, I'm going to have to cut you short there. But I think we will talk to you again so that we can continue with this conversation. I believe you have actually more to share with us. But because of time, I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you so much for being with us on the program, Rayid. And I look forward to talking to you again. So that was Rayid Debi calling us all the way from Palestine in the Middle East. And we were talking about how the rise of Taliban, after the American trip withdrawal in that particular country, saw the rise of this Taliban government. And lest we forget, it's very much prophetically aligned. So we are observing the events of what is happening in that whole region of the Middle East, and what this means for the body of Christ, what this also means to the Holy Land, Jerusalem, because there are certain signs that we need to follow, right? But because of time, well, it is day one of the Your Loveworld specials that we've all been waiting for with our dear man of God, Pastor Chris. So I want to encourage you, all of you, in actual fact, to stay put, invite somebody, make sure you listen. And like you said yesterday in the communion service, you have to start with us from day one. Because if you don't start with us from day one, you're going to miss a lot of things. And now to put together the dots, connecting the dots from there might be actually very difficult for you. But when we come back, we want to talk about more of the lies from Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci lied. And he lied about one too many things. I don't know if he can even still remember or count the number of times that he's lied when it comes to this COVID-19 debacle. But we'll talk to you after service. Enjoy service and make sure you participate. See you a little bit later. God bless you.